23 refugees, broke, hunted, called a deceitful race, and marked for expulsion. One man fought back through the courts and won. 30 years later, a Polish broker would finance an entire revolution out of his own pocket, loan money to the men who wrote the Constitution, and die penniless in an unmarked grave at 44. The government never bothered to fix it. This is not the story they taught you. This is how America was actually built, and the people who built it have been erased from the monument. What follows is what historians have documented and verified through primary sources: colonial records from the Dutch West India Company, the correspondence of George Washington housed in the National Archives, eyewitness accounts from the Continental Congress, and the testimonies of survivors preserved in the archives of Jewish communities across America. The ship appeared on the horizon of New Amsterdam harbor on a September morning in 1654. 23 Jews stood on the deck of the St. Katrina, their clothes salt-stained, their bodies hollow from weeks at sea. They had fled Brazil when Portugal reconquered it and expelled every Jew by order of the Inquisition. Most had escaped to Holland. These 23 kept going north, toward a Dutch settlement they had heard about but never seen, a place where, maybe, they could breathe without permission. They were refugees. They had no money. They had no guarantees, and the man waiting for them on shore despised everything they represented. Peter Stuyvesant stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the ship dock. He was the governor of New Amsterdam, a strict Calvinist with a wooden leg and a hatred for anyone who did not worship his God in his way. When he saw Jews stepping off that ship, something curdled in his chest. He called them a deceitful race. He called them hateful enemies and blasphemers of the name of Christ. Within days, he wrote to the Dutch West India Company demanding permission to expel them. His reasoning was simple. If we let the Jews stay, he argued, we cannot refuse the Lutherans. We cannot refuse the Papists. The floodgates will open. New Amsterdam will become a circus of false religions. The Jews did not have time to unpack their belongings before the lawsuits began. The captain of the St. Katrina sued them for unpaid passage fees. 2 of them were thrown into debtor's prison. The rest huddled together in temporary shelters, wondering if they had survived the Atlantic crossing only to be shipped back into the teeth of the Inquisition. But one man refused to accept expulsion. His name was Asser Levy. He was a butcher from Vilna who had done business in Germany before fleeing to Brazil. He understood contracts, he understood rights, and he understood that the Dutch West India Company was not run by Calvinist fanatics. It was run by merchants who valued profit over piety. Levy took Stuyvesant to court twice. The first case was about standing guard duty. Stuyvesant had barred Jews from serving in the militia, then slapped them with a special tax to pay for their own protection. Levy argued that if Jews could not defend the colony, they should not be taxed for defense. The court sided with him. Jews won the right to stand guard. The second case was about trade. Stuyvesant had forbidden Jews from opening retail shops or owning real estate. Levy petitioned again. This time, he went over Stuyvesant's head directly to the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam. Influential Jews in Holland pressured the company. The company, which cared more about trade revenue than theological purity, overruled Stuyvesant. Jews could stay, they could trade, they could build. It was the first legal victory for Jews in what would become the United States. It set a precedent that would echo for centuries. Rights are not granted by the kindness of rulers. They are won through persistence, through courts, through the grinding machinery of law. But the Jews of New Amsterdam lived under suffocating restrictions. They could not worship publicly. Their synagogues had to be hidden in private homes. They could not hold public office. They could not own land in certain parts of the settlement. They were tolerated, not welcomed. And yet they built. They formed mutual aid societies to care for their own sick and poor. They established trade networks that stretched from Amsterdam to the Caribbean. They became brokers, merchants, importers of fur and whale oil and rum. Stuyvesant watched them thrive and fumed in silence. By the time of the American Revolution, there were only about 3,000 Jews in the colonies. They were scattered across New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Maryland, the Carolinas. They had established 5 synagogues. Most were Sephardic, descendants of Spanish and Portuguese Jews who had been expelled in 1492 and had wandered for generations before landing here. They spoke Ladino, not Yiddish. They carried the memory of the Inquisition in their bones. When the revolution began, most Jews sided with the patriots. They hoped that independence from Britain would mean full civic equality. No more religious tests for office. No more second-class citizenship. They fought in the Continental Army. They financed the war effort. And one man, a Polish broker named Haym Salomon, became the financial backbone of the entire revolution. Haym Salomon was born in Leszno, Poland, around 1740. His family was Sephardic Jewish, descended from those who had fled Spain centuries earlier. In his youth, Salomon studied finance in Western Europe. He learned multiple languages. He understood how international credit worked, how bills of exchange could convert foreign loans into hard currency. In 1772, after the first partition of Poland tore his homeland apart, Salomon left for England. By 1775, he had arrived in New York City. He immediately joined the Sons of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty were not a polite debating society. They were revolutionaries who tarred and feathered British loyalists, who dumped tea into harbors, who prepared for war in the shadows. Salomon used his financial skills to support them. He brokered deals. He moved money. And in 1776, the British arrested him as a spy. They threw him in prison for 18 months. The conditions were brutal. Men died of disease and starvation in those cells. But the British discovered that Salomon spoke German fluently. They needed translators to communicate with the Hessian mercenaries they had hired to fight the colonists. So they released Salomon and put him to work. Salomon took the job, and then he used it to sabotage the British war effort from the inside. While translating between British officers and Hessian soldiers, Salomon whispered to the Hessians in their own language. He told them about the American cause. He described the promise of freedom, of land ownership, of a society where a man could rise based on merit instead of birth. He convinced Hessian soldiers to desert. He encouraged British troops to abandon their posts. He was a one-man espionage operation, and the British had no idea. In 1778, they arrested him again. This time, they planned to execute him. Salomon escaped. He fled New York and made his way to Philadelphia, where the Continental Congress was desperately trying to hold the revolution together with string and prayer. The colonial economy was collapsing. The continental dollar was worthless. Soldiers were deserting because they had not been paid in months. The French had promised aid, but French loans were useless unless someone could convert them into actual currency that American troops could spend. Robert Morris, the superintendent of finance, was drowning. He had no money. He had no credit. and the revolution was bleeding out. Salomon walked into Morris's office and got to work. The office is cramped, lit by candlelight. Papers are stacked everywhere, bills and ledgers covered in red ink. Robert Morris sits alone at his desk, his face gray with exhaustion. He holds a letter in his trembling hands. It is from Washington. The general needs $20,000 or the army will collapse before they reach Yorktown. Morris speaks to the empty room, his voice cracking. Morris, we have nothing. The treasury is empty. Congress cannot pay the troops. If we do not get money in the next 2 weeks, this revolution dies at Yorktown. Every merchant in Philadelphia has turned their back. France promised aid, but the loans are sitting in Paris, useless. We have no way to convert them. No one will touch our credit. No one. He drops the letter onto the desk. The candle flickers. The door opens. Haym Salomon steps inside, calm, focused. Morris looks up at him, desperate. Salomon does not speak. He picks up the letter, reads it, then sets it back down. He nods once. Morris understands. Within 2 weeks, Salomon raises $20,000. Washington marches to Yorktown. The revolution survives. Salomon did it. Within 2 weeks, he had raised $20,000 by selling bills of exchange to American merchants, converting French and Dutch loans into hard currency. Washington received the money. The Continental Army marched south to Yorktown. They surrounded British General Cornwallis, cut off his escape routes, and forced his surrender. The Battle of Yorktown was the final major engagement of the war. It ended 8 years of fighting, and it only happened because Haym Salomon found the money. But Salomon did not stop there. For the remainder of the war, he worked alongside Robert Morris, brokering the sale of foreign aid, converting loans into usable funds. He personally supported members of the Continental Congress who were broke and stranded in Philadelphia. James Madison, the future architect of the Constitution, received loans from Salomon. So did James Monroe. So did James Wilson. Salomon charged them below market interest rates. Often, he did not ask for repayment at all. He also gave outright gifts to soldiers and officers who had been ruined financially by the war, men who had sacrificed everything for independence and had nothing left. Salomon believed they were unsung heroes. He used his own fortune to keep them afloat. By the time the war ended, Haym Salomon was nearly bankrupt. He had poured his wealth into the revolution. The government owed him hundreds of thousands of dollars. He died on January 6, 1785, at the age of 44. His estate filed claims with the government for repayment. The claims were never honored. Haym Salomon was buried in the Mikveh Israel Cemetery in Philadelphia. His grave was unmarked, no headstone, no monument. For over a century, no one bothered to fix it. A marble plaque was eventually installed by his great-grandson. A granite memorial was placed at the cemetery gate, but the grave itself remains unmarked to this day. The man who financed the American Revolution died penniless and forgotten. George Washington knew what Salomon had done. In 1790, Washington wrote a letter to the Jewish congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. The letter was in response to an address they had sent him, congratulating him on his presidency. Washington's reply redefined what American tolerance actually meant. It was not condescension. It was not permission granted from above. It was a contract between equals. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. it is now no more that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For, happily, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. The letter lives in the National Archives. It is one of the clearest statements of religious freedom ever written by an American president. And it was written to Jews. The Jewish population in America grew slowly. By 1820, there were still only about 3,000 Jews in the entire country. But then came the second wave. Between 1820 and 1880, hundreds of thousands of Jews arrived from Germany, Austria, and Hungary. They were fleeing the resurgence of anti-Semitism in Europe, the revolutions of 1848, the economic collapse that followed. They settled in the Midwest and the South. They started as peddlers, traveling salesmen who walked from town to town with packs on their backs, selling goods to rural communities. Many of them eventually opened general stores. Some of those stores grew into department stores that still exist today. The Civil War split the Jewish community the way it split the country. Jews fought on both sides. In the Confederacy, Judah P. Benjamin became Secretary of State, the first Jew to hold a cabinet position in any North American government. In the Union, thousands of Jews served in the Army, and one Union general, Ulysses S. Grant, issued General Order No. 11 in December 1862, expelling every Jew from his military district in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky. Grant accused Jews of smuggling cotton to the Confederacy. He ordered all Jews, as a class, to leave the district within 24 hours. Families were thrown out of their homes. Jewish merchants had their goods confiscated. It was the most sweeping official act of anti-Semitism in American history. Abraham Lincoln shut it down within days. When Jewish leaders protested to the president, Lincoln immediately revoked the order. He sent a telegram to Grant instructing him to rescind it. Jews were allowed to return. Grant later admitted the order was a mistake. When he ran for president in 1868, he sought Jewish support and expressed regret for what he had done. But the fact that it happened at all revealed something darker. Anti-Semitism was not a European disease that had been left behind at Ellis Island. It was here. It was embedded in American institutions, and it would only get worse. Between 1880 and 1924, over 2.5 million Jews fled Eastern Europe and Russia. They were escaping pogroms, violent riots in which mobs burned Jewish homes, looted Jewish businesses, raped Jewish women, and murdered Jewish men in the streets. The Russian Empire encouraged these pogroms as a way to redirect popular anger away from the government and toward a convenient scapegoat. Entire villages were wiped out. Survivors packed what they could carry and boarded ships to America. They arrived at Ellis Island and went straight into the garment trade. The Lower East Side of Manhattan became one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the world. Jewish immigrants worked in sweatshops, sewing clothes for 12 to 16 hours a day in cramped, airless rooms. Children worked alongside adults. Safety regulations did not exist. Fires were common. On March 25, 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist factory in New York caught fire. The building had no sprinklers. The exit doors were locked from the outside to prevent workers from taking breaks. 146 people died, most of them young Jewish and Italian immigrant women. Some jumped from the 9th floor windows to escape the flames. Their bodies hit the pavement like stones. The Triangle Fire shocked the nation. It became a turning point for the labor movement. Jewish workers, many of them women, organized unions. They went on strike. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union became one of the most powerful labor organizations in America. Jewish activists like Rose Schneiderman and Clara Lemlich led the fight for workplace safety laws, minimum wage, and the 8-hour workday. The labor protections that American workers take for granted today were built in large part by Jewish immigrants who had watched their friends burn to death in factories. The room is packed with garment workers, mostly women. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of sweat. Faces are exhausted, hands scarred from needles and machines. Clara Lemlich stands at the front, a tiny woman with fierce eyes. She is 23 years old. Her ribs are still broken from where factory thugs beat her during the last strike. She speaks in Yiddish. Her voice cuts through the noise like a blade. Clara Lemlich, I have worked in the shops for years. I have seen girls younger than my sister burned because the doors were locked. I have watched women faint at their machines because they have not eaten in 2 days. I have heard bosses laugh when we asked for fire escapes. She pauses. The room is silent now. Clara Lemlich, they think we are weak because we are women. They think we are powerless because we are immigrants. They think we will accept anything because we are desperate. They are wrong. She raises her fist. Clara Lemlich, I move that we strike, all of us, every shop, every floor. We walk out and we do not come back until they give us safety, until they give us wages we can live on, until they stop treating us like we are disposable. The room erupts. 20,000 garment workers walk out the next day. The uprising of the 20,000 begins. The strikes worked. Factory owners were forced to negotiate. Working conditions improved. Hours were reduced. Wages increased. The labor movement, powered by Jewish immigrants, reshaped American capitalism. But even as Jews built America's economy, they faced walls everywhere else. Universities imposed quotas, limiting Jewish enrollment. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of them capped the number of Jewish students they would admit. Medical schools did the same. Law firms refused to hire Jewish lawyers. Country clubs and hotels posted signs, "No Jews allowed." Entire neighborhoods had restrictive covenants forbidding the sale of property to Jews. In 1916, Louis Brandeis became the first Jewish Supreme Court justice. His nomination was the most contested in American history up to that point. Opponents called him radical, untrustworthy, dangerous. The confirmation hearings dragged on for months. In the end, Brandeis was confirmed. He served for 23 years and became one of the most influential justices in the court's history, defending civil liberties and workers' rights with a ferocity that terrified corporate America. Emma Lazarus wrote the words engraved on the Statue of Liberty, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." She was a Jewish poet from New York. Her poem, The New Colossus, was not originally part of the statue. It was added later, in 1903, as a tribute to the millions of immigrants flooding into America. Lazarus had died in 1887, never knowing her words would become the defining statement of American identity. Jewish contributions to America are woven into every industry, every field: medicine, science, law, music, film, literature, journalism. Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine. Albert Einstein reshaped our understanding of the universe. Leonard Bernstein conducted the New York Philharmonic. Bob Dylan rewrote American music. Ruth Bader Ginsburg fought for gender equality from the Supreme Court bench. Steven Spielberg told stories that defined generations. But the contributions are not the point. The point is that Jews built this country while being told repeatedly that they did not belong here. They financed the revolution and died in unmarked graves. They worked in factories that killed them and then organized unions to protect the workers who survived. They were expelled, restricted, quoted, banned, and hated. And still, they built. In 1654, 23 refugees stepped off a ship in New Amsterdam. They were broke. They were sued. 2 of them were thrown in jail. The governor called them a deceitful race and tried to have them expelled. 1 man fought back through the courts and won. That was the beginning. What came after was not a gift. It was not charity. It was a fight waged over centuries in courtrooms and factories and battlefields and laboratories. It was a refusal to disappear, a refusal to accept second-class citizenship, a refusal to be erased. Haym Salomon financed the American Revolution and died penniless at 44. The government never repaid him. His grave remains unmarked, but the country he helped build still stands. The words George Washington wrote to the Newport congregation still echo. The government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. That promise has been tested. It has been broken. It has been fought for and defended and sometimes ignored. But it is still there, carved into the foundation of this country by people who had every reason to give up and refused. 23 refugees, 1 legal victory, and 370 years later, the country they helped build is still arguing over who belongs here and who does not. The answer was written in 1790. It has been written in every courthouse, every union hall, every laboratory, every unmarked grave since then. Everyone belongs here, or no one does. That is the revolution they financed. That is the country they built. And that is the story you were never taught until now.